I was driving through the middle of nowhere, a stretch of highway cutting through the forests of the Pacific Northwest. The kind of place where the only company you have is the distant glow of truck stops and the occasional highway patrol. This wasn't a casual road trip. I had just packed up my life from Seattle after a bad breakup and a job that had me barely scraping by. An old college friend had offered me a fresh start down in California, a job and a couch to crash on until I got back on my feet. The idea of a clean slate was appealing, but I had to get through this 14-hour drive first. I left late, around 9 p.m., hoping to avoid the city traffic. By the time midnight rolled around, I was somewhere deep in Oregon, winding through pitch-black roads, trees towering over both sides of the highway. My eyelids were heavy. I had already downed 2 energy drinks and had another in the cup holder, but the road was hypnotizing. Then I saw him, a man standing on the side of the highway, just beyond the reach of my headlights. He wasn't hitchhiking. He wasn't waving for help. He was just standing there. I barely caught a glimpse of his face as I passed. A suit, slightly disheveled, and a pale, emotionless expression. His eyes locked onto mine through the windshield, his head turning slowly as my car passed him. A shiver ran down my spine. I exhaled sharply, shaking off the unease. Maybe he was some businessman who got stranded, or maybe I was just seeing things from exhaustion. Either way, I kept driving. A few miles later, I saw another figure standing on the shoulder. Same suit, same face, same expression. I nearly swerved off the road. My heart pounded against my ribs. I forced myself to glance in the rearview mirror. Nothing. The road was empty behind me. Now I was properly awake. I turned on the radio, but the static filled the car instead of music. Every station, just static. I tried my phone, no signal. I shook my head, gripping the wheel tighter. You're exhausted. Just find a gas station, grab some coffee, and keep moving. 20 minutes later, I spotted a roadside diner. It was one of those 24-hour places, neon lights flickering just enough to make it look abandoned. I pulled in, parked, and stepped out into the freezing air. The place was empty except for a tired-looking waitress behind the counter. Coffee? She asked before I even sat down. Please, I muttered, rubbing my eyes. She poured me a cup, and I took a long sip. My nerves started to settle, the warmth spreading through my body. Then I glanced out the diner window. There, under the buzzing street light, the man in the suit. He wasn't moving, just standing there, watching. His hands hung limply at his sides, his head slightly tilted, as if studying me. My stomach twisted. I turned back to the waitress. Hey, do you see that guy out there? She glanced up lazily from the register. Who? I turned back to the window. He was gone. I swallowed hard. Never mind. The coffee did little to calm my nerves. I paid, stepped outside, and glanced around. The lot was empty. Just my car and an old rusted pickup. I got back on the road, my hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles were white. Just focus on driving. Just get to California. The highway stretched out ahead, endless and dark. Then, something shifted in my rearview mirror. I saw him, sitting in my back seat. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching against the pavement. My heart was a hammer in my chest. The car was empty. I was losing it. I had to be. Breathing heavily, I forced myself to keep driving. I was too scared to stop, too scared to look anywhere but the road ahead. But I wasn't alone, and I knew somehow that he was still watching. The road stretched endlessly ahead, a river of asphalt slicing through the blackened void of the Pacific Northwest wilderness. My fingers ached from gripping the steering wheel, my breath shallow and erratic. I forced myself to keep my eyes locked on the road, refusing to check the rearview mirror again. The man in the suit had been there. I had seen him in the back seat, but when I looked again, he was gone. Hallucination, exhaustion, stress. My mind scrambled for explanations, but none of them stuck. I needed to stop. I needed rest. A sign loomed on the side of the road. Rest area, 1 mile. I hesitated. A rest stop meant getting out of the car, sitting in the open air, being vulnerable. But my body felt heavy, my mind clouded. If I didn't stop, I'd crash. I pulled into the rest area, a small, desolate lot with a couple of vending machines and a bathroom building dimly lit by flickering fluorescent lights. There were 2 other cars parked near the edge of the lot, both empty. I turned off the engine and leaned my head against the seat. Just a few minutes. Just enough to shake this feeling. I closed my eyes. Then I heard it. A soft click. The unmistakable sound of a car door opening. My blood ran cold. I wasn't sure if I had actually heard it or if my mind was playing tricks on me. The silence was so thick I could hear my own pulse in my ears. Then, the softest rustling. From the back seat. Every hair on my body stood on end. My hand hovered over the ignition. I should just start the car and floor it. But something kept me frozen. A dreadful, suffocating feeling that if I moved, if I acknowledged it, something terrible would happen. I swallowed hard and slowly reached for the rearview mirror. I tilted it. A face. Not just a reflection, not a trick of light. A pale face staring back at me from the darkness of the back seat. I didn't scream. I couldn't. The breath caught in my throat, trapped by a terror so profound it paralyzed me. The face didn't move. The expression was blank, the eyes too dark, too hollow. And then it spoke. A voice, hoarse and whisper-thin. You shouldn't have stopped. The words slammed into me like ice water, jerking me out of my trance. I lunged for the door handle and practically threw myself out of the car, landing hard on the cold pavement. My breath came in ragged gasps as I stumbled backward. The car remained still. No movement inside. The windows were tinted just enough that I couldn't see in clearly. Then, a slow creak. The driver's side door opened. I turned and ran. The bathroom building was the only structure in sight, and I bolted toward it, my feet slipping against the damp pavement. I rushed inside and locked myself in one of the stalls, pressing my back against the cold concrete wall. Silence. The only sound was my own heartbeat hammering in my ears. I pulled out my phone. No signal. Of course. I forced my breathing to slow, listening intently. No footsteps. No movement. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe I was losing my mind. Then, the lights flickered. Once. Twice. And then they went out. The darkness was suffocating. I fumbled for my phone's flashlight, my hand shaking so badly I could barely unlock the screen. A sound cut through the silence. Not footsteps. Not breathing. A whisper. I told you not to stop. It was right outside the stall. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I kicked the stall door open and ran. My flashlight illuminated the doorway just long enough for me to see someone, standing just inside the entrance. The suit. The pale face. But now, the mouth was stretched into something unnatural. A grin that was too wide, too hollow. I crashed into the door, shoving past it and sprinting to my car. My keys were still inside, in the ignition. I didn't dare look in the rearview mirror as I turned the key, the engine roaring to life. I slammed the gas pedal to the floor and peeled out of the lot, my tires screeching against the pavement. The headlights cut through the darkness, and in my periphery, I saw him, standing by the vending machines, his head tilting as he watched me drive away. I drove for miles before I finally pulled off into a well-lit gas station, shaking uncontrollably. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't stop until I reached my friend's place in California. And even now, weeks later, I still feel it. That lingering, crawling sensation that I'm being watched. That I never really left him behind. And sometimes, when I check my mirror at night, I swear I see him. Sitting in my backseat. Smiling. Story 2. It was past midnight when I took the detour through a long, desolate stretch of road cutting through Pennsylvania's backwoods. I had spent the day visiting my parents and was on my way home, but I wanted to avoid the construction delays on the interstate. My GPS suggested an alternative route that looked promising, until I was in the middle of nowhere, alone, with miles of darkness stretching in every direction. The road was eerily quiet. No cars. No streetlights. Just my headlights cutting through the dense fog that had started creeping in. My gas gauge blinked at me, a reminder that I had been ignoring it for the past hour. I cursed under my breath and checked my phone. 0 bars. Then, as if the universe had read my mind, a glowing sign appeared through the fog, a small gas station sitting at the edge of the woods. It looked old, maybe even abandoned at first, but a single light buzzed above the entrance. The pumps looked ancient, the kind that didn't take credit cards. I pulled in, parking beside the only other vehicle in the lot, an old, rusted pickup truck. Its paint was peeling, and the driver's seat was empty, but the hood was slightly raised, as if someone had just been working under it. Inside the station, a middle-aged attendant stood behind the counter, lazily flipping through a newspaper. I grabbed a bottle of water and approached, fishing out some cash for the gas. "Pump 3, I said, setting a 20 on the counter. The attendant glanced at the pickup truck outside. "Traveling alone this late?" I nodded, suddenly uneasy at the question. He tapped his fingers on the counter, then sighed. "Be careful out there. People disappear on this road." I forced a chuckle. "Well, that's reassuring." He didn't smile. He just handed me my change and muttered, "Lock your doors." I stepped outside, unnerved but brushing it off. The night was silent. Too silent. Even the wind had stopped moving. As I walked toward my car, something shifted in my peripheral vision. A figure, standing just at the tree line. A man. He was still, motionless, partially obscured by the mist. I froze. My breath hitched in my throat. He was watching me. I turned quickly, climbing into my car and locking the doors. My heart hammered as I started the engine, my eyes darting between my mirrors. The figure was gone. I forced myself to breathe, then pulled out of the gas station, eager to put as much distance between myself and that place as possible. I had barely been back on the road for 5 minutes when a soft chime came from my dashboard. Low tire pressure. I cursed again. The car wobbled slightly, and the dull thudding sound told me everything I needed to know. I had a flat. I eased onto the shoulder, gripping the wheel tightly. The road stretched behind me, empty and dark. Ahead, nothing but fog. I checked my phone. Still no service. Taking a deep breath, I turned on my hazard lights and stepped out. The cold air bit into my skin as I rounded the back of my car, shining my flashlight on the rear driver's side tire. Flat. I sighed and popped the trunk. Just as I reached inside for the spare, I heard it. A soft shuffling sound, like footsteps on gravel. I turned sharply, my flashlight beam sweeping across the empty road. Nothing. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breathing. I was just on edge. It was late, and I was alone. My mind was playing tricks on me. Then I noticed something strange. Faint, damp footprints on the road, leading from the woods, leading to me. I backed away, my heart thundering. The footprints looked fresh, glistening in the glow of my hazard lights, and they stopped right behind my car. I wasn't alone. I spun around just in time to see a shadow move, something darting behind the truck that had pulled up just down the road. It was the same rusted pickup from the gas station. The driver's door was open, but no one was inside. I bolted to my car, yanking the door open just as a voice called out from the darkness. "You need help." I slammed the door shut and locked it, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The voice was too close. I fumbled for my keys, hands shaking, but before I could start the engine, something moved in the back seat. A whisper. "You should have kept driving." I didn't turn around. I didn't want to see what was back there. I just floored the gas pedal, the car jerking forward despite the ruined tire. The engine roared, drowning out the sound of something, a shuffle, a breath, just behind me. As I sped away, my rearview mirror caught a glimpse of movement. A figure stepping onto the road, watching me go. And just before the fog swallowed them whole, I saw it, the shape of their face. My face. I didn't look back again. I couldn't. My pulse pounded in my ears as my car limped down the empty road, the uneven thudding of the flat tire shaking the whole frame. The whisper still lingered in my mind, like an echo trapped in my skull. "You should have kept driving." I had to get out of here. I needed to reach civilization. A town. A gas station. Anywhere with people. My eyes darted to my phone. No signal. The glowing NO service symbol at the top of the screen made my stomach twist into knots. I gritted my teeth and kept going, the car groaning in protest as the damaged tire fought to stay intact. Then, headlights. In my rearview mirror, bright twin beams cut through the darkness, gaining on me fast. My breath hitched. The rusted pickup truck. The same one from the gas station. It was following me. I pressed the gas pedal as much as I could without completely wrecking my wheel. The truck stayed on me, closing in. The road was too narrow for me to swerve or maneuver. I had no choice but to keep going. Then the truck's high beams flashed. Once. Twice. A signal? A warning? No, it was something worse. My headlights flickered. For a second, the road ahead of me vanished. Total, consuming darkness swallowed everything. The road. The trees. The fog. Nothing. I gasped and yanked the wheel to the side, trying to slow down without losing control. My headlights flickered back on, just in time for me to see something standing in the middle of the road. A figure. My figure. I slammed the brakes. The car screeched, skidding across the asphalt. I braced for impact, but there was nothing. No sound. No thud. No body. The road was empty. Panting, I turned my gaze toward the rearview mirror. The truck was gone. My stomach churned violently. I sat frozen, fingers gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. I had seen myself, standing there, waiting. I had nearly hit me. A shiver ran down my spine, deep and primal. My breathing was ragged. I needed to think. I needed a plan. I forced my car back into motion, crawling forward as the flat tire struggled beneath me. I kept my eyes locked straight ahead, trying not to focus on the things I had seen, the things I had almost seen. Then, up ahead, lights. A sign. Motel, 2 miles. I could make it. I could get a room, regroup, call for help. The road felt longer than 2 miles. The fog had thickened, swirling unnaturally around the beams of my headlights. My tire wobbled, barely holding together. Then, the neon glow of the motel's sign flickered through the haze. The building sat off the road, squat and unwelcoming, like something frozen in time. A half-empty parking lot. One light buzzing above the office door. I pulled in, the car jerking violently as my rim scraped the pavement. As soon as I cut the engine, silence pressed down around me. I hesitated before getting out. The thought of stepping into the open sent ice down my spine. But I had no choice. I pushed the door open and stepped onto the cracked pavement. A breeze moved through the trees, carrying a sound with it. A whisper. I forced myself forward. The office door creaked as I entered, and the smell of stale cigarette smoke hit me instantly. A man sat behind the counter, barely looking up from an old black and white TV. He was thin, gray-haired, with deep-set eyes that seemed disinterested in my entire existence. "Room for the night," I muttered, pulling out my wallet. He glanced up, his gaze lingering on me for a second too long. Then, slowly, he reached under the counter and pulled out a key. 26, he said. Into the lot. I took the key and forced a polite nod. My nerves felt like exposed wires, but I was too exhausted to question anything else. I stepped back outside. The wind had picked up, rustling the trees at the edge of the lot. I didn't look at the road. I didn't check the rearview mirror. I just went straight to my room. The door groaned as I unlocked it and stepped inside. The motel room smelled like damp carpet and old wood. A single lamp bathed the room in weak yellow light. I locked the door, double-checking the chain. Finally, I let out a shaky breath. I was safe. I tossed my bag onto the bed and collapsed into the chair beside the window, running my hands through my hair. I needed sleep. I needed a moment of silence. Then, a knock. Soft, barely audible. I froze. It came again. A slow, deliberate knock. I swallowed hard and forced myself to peek through the curtain. A dark figure stood at the edge of the lot, just standing, watching. I stepped away from the window, my pulse thundering. Then my phone buzzed. I nearly jumped out of my skin. My hands shook as I grabbed it. A text message. "Unknown number? Are you alone?" My breath hitched. I stared at the message, my mind screaming at me to ignore it. Then another. "Unknown number. I can see you." My body turned ice cold. The knock came again. Harder. I backed away, my hands trembling. Then my phone buzzed once more. "Unknown number. Open the door. I need to come in." I squeezed my eyes shut, my heart hammering. The knocking stopped. Silence. I stayed like that for what felt like an eternity. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Maybe more. Finally, I gathered enough courage to look outside. The figure was gone. The parking lot was empty. No footprints. No sign of anyone. I didn't sleep that night. I kept the lamp on. I stayed curled in the chair, my body refusing to relax. By morning, the fog had lifted. The motel parking lot looked ordinary. The road was just a road. But I knew better. I checked out without a word. I didn't ask the motel clerk any questions. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. As I pulled back onto the highway, my heart finally began to slow. I was going home. I exhaled. Then, in the rearview mirror, a figure. In the back seat, smiling. I swerved off the road, my stomach lurching. The car jerked violently, my hands shaking as I turned around. The seat was empty. I sat there, panting. No, not empty. On the seat, a motel key. Room 26. I stared at it, the small tag swaying gently, as if something had just placed it there. I didn't take that key with me. I left it in the room. I'm still driving, hours later. I don't know where I'm going anymore. But every time I check the mirror, I see the road behind me. I see the empty seat. And sometimes, I swear I see myself sitting there, watching, waiting. Story 3. The snow had started falling heavier by the time I passed into the outskirts of the small town. The road signs were half buried in white, and my windshield wipers struggled to keep up. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, my fingers aching from how long I'd been driving. I was on my way to visit Todd, my boyfriend, for the week. He lived out in a rural area, and I had stupidly decided to beat the incoming storm rather than wait it out in the morning. Now, I was regretting it. I had been driving for hours, my little Hyundai barely making it through the thickening snow. My phone had no service. The only other light besides my headlights was the dim glow of my dashboard, reminding me that my gas tank was sitting just above empty. I needed to stop. When I spotted the diner up ahead, its neon sign flickering like a mirage through the snow, I nearly sighed in relief. I pulled into the lot, my tires crunching over the ice. The place was nearly empty except for 2 other cars. I parked and hurried inside, the little bell above the door jingling as I entered. The warmth was a shock against my frozen skin. The place had that classic small-town diner feel, vinyl booths, checkered floors, a faded menu above the counter. A waitress with tired eyes glanced up at me as I shook the snow off my coat. "Sit anywhere you want, hon," she said. I slid into a booth near the window, rubbing my hands together for warmth. I needed coffee, maybe a sandwich, but more than anything, I needed directions to the nearest motel. As I pulled out my phone to check for places to stay, a voice spoke from the counter. "There's a motel just 5 minutes up the road," the man said. I looked up. A man sat at the bar, his stool turned halfway toward me. He was in his late 40s, maybe early 50s, with a scruffy beard and deep-set eyes. He wore a thick flannel jacket, and a half-empty beer sat in front of him. I hadn't told him I was looking for a motel. Still, I forced a polite smile. "Oh, thanks. Yeah, I might need a place for the night." The waitress dropped off a coffee at my table. "You should stay put, sweetheart. It's going to get worse out there." I nodded but didn't commit to anything. The man at the bar watched me. His gaze was unreadable, but something about it made my skin prickle. "You're not from around here, are you?" he asked. I shook my head, sipping my coffee. "Just passing through." The waitress shot him a warning glance, and he let out a low chuckle, turning back to his beer. I finished my sandwich quickly, paid my bill, and stepped back outside. The snow had already covered my car's windshield in the short time I'd been inside. I climbed into the driver's seat, turned on the defroster, and pulled up the motel's location on my GPS. It was only 5 minutes away. I started the car and backed out of the lot, the snow crunching beneath my tires. As I turned onto the road, I noticed something in my side mirror. The man from the diner was standing outside now, watching me leave. I gritted my teeth and focused on the road. The motel appeared sooner than I expected, its neon vacancy sign buzzing faintly in the cold air. The building was small and outdated, with a handful of cars parked in the lot. I parked near the front office and stepped inside. The clerk barely looked up as I asked for a room. He slid me a key without a word, and I made my way back outside. I had booked room 14. I found it easily enough, a single door at the far end of the lot. The hallway light flickered as I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room was exactly what I expected: stained carpet, tacky wallpaper, and the scent of old wood. The heater rattled as it kicked on. I set my bag down and pulled out my phone. No service. I sighed. Maybe the Wi-Fi would work. I'd have to check at the front desk. Just as I was about to leave, I noticed something strange. The closet door. It was slightly open. A sliver of darkness peeked through the gap. I stared at it, my stomach twisting. Had it been open when I walked in? I stepped forward, my pulse quickening. Slowly, I reached out and pulled the door open. The closet was empty. Just an old wooden shelf and a single wire hanger swaying slightly, as if it had just been touched. I let out a nervous chuckle. "You're paranoid." I shut the closet and turned to leave. Then, a knock at the door. I froze. It was soft, gentle. I swallowed hard. Through the peephole, the hallway was empty. I exhaled. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe. Knock, knock, knock. This time, the sound came from the closet door. I turned, my entire body stiff with fear. The closet door was slightly open again. The hanger was still swaying. And then, from the darkness inside, a whisper. "You shouldn't have come here." I stood frozen in place, my breath shallow, my skin crawling with cold that had nothing to do with the winter outside. The closet door was still ajar, a sliver of darkness stretching just wide enough to taunt me. I hadn't left it open. And yet, it was. The whisper still rang in my ears. "You shouldn't have come here." I swallowed, gripping the doorknob so hard my knuckles turned white. My body screamed at me to turn around, to grab my bag, to leave and never look back. But I couldn't. I had to know. With every ounce of courage I had left, I yanked the closet door open. The light from the room spilled in, cutting through the shadows. Empty. A bare shelf. An old hanger. The faint scent of mildew. Nothing else. I exhaled a shuddering breath, half laughing at myself. Exhaustion. That had to be it. I had been on the road too long, running on caffeine and bad decisions. My brain was playing tricks on me. I shut the closet door, this time making sure it latched. Then I turned my attention to my phone. No signal. Of course. I needed Wi-Fi. I grabbed my key and stepped into the hall, shivering as the cold seeped into my skin. The front office was just across the parking lot, its dim light barely visible through the frost-covered window. The snow had thickened since I arrived. The lot was nearly buried, my car barely visible beneath the accumulating white. Then, something caught my eye. Footprints. Fresh ones. Leading from my door, but not to it. They started in the middle of the lot, as if someone had just appeared there. I stared, my stomach twisting into knots. The prints led up to my door, then stopped. No return path. I forced myself to move, my boots crunching over the ice as I crossed the lot. I tried not to think about it. I tried not to let my imagination run wild. The front office door creaked as I stepped inside. The clerk, an older man with deep wrinkles and tired eyes, barely glanced up from the static-covered television behind the counter. "Need something?" he muttered. "Wi-Fi password," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He nodded to a faded sign taped to the desk. Motel_guest 123. I typed it into my phone. No connection. "Your Wi-Fi's not working," I said. He didn't look surprised. "Storm must be messing with it." I exhaled. "There's no cell service either." "Yeah," he said, still staring at the TV. "That happens sometimes." I frowned. His lack of concern was unsettling. I hesitated before speaking again. "Has anyone else checked in tonight?" That made him look at me. His eyes flickered with something unreadable. "No," he said. "Why?" I opened my mouth, then shut it. What was I going to say? That someone had whispered to me from inside a closet? That I had seen footprints materialize in the snow? I shook my head. Nothing. Just wondering. I turned to leave, but his voice stopped me. "Hey." I looked back. His face was unreadable, but his voice had shifted, lower, almost hesitant. "Lock your door," he said. "And don't open it. For anyone." A chill ran down my spine. I forced a nod and stepped back outside. The cold bit into my skin, the wind howling through the trees. The footprints in the snow, they were gone. I swallowed hard and hurried back to my room, locking the door behind me. I shoved the chair under the handle for good measure. Then, I tried to sleep. I woke up to knocking. Soft, deliberate. Knock, knock, knock. I bolted upright, my heart hammering. For a second, I was disoriented. The room was pitch black, save for the faint glow from the parking lot outside. My breath fogged in the freezing air. The heater wasn't running anymore. The knocking came again. I reached for my phone. The screen lit up, 3:12 a.m. Still no service. I strained my ears. There was no wind now. No sounds from outside. Just silence. And the knocking. Slow. Rhythmic. Then, the doorknob rattled. I sucked in a sharp breath, pressing my back against the headboard. Someone was out there. Or something. I forced myself to sit up, my pulse pounding against my ribs. My eyes flicked toward the chair still wedged under the door handle. It hadn't moved. The door was locked. Whoever was out there couldn't get in. Knock, knock, knock. Then, a whisper, right against the door. "Let me in." My hands clenched the sheets. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The voice came again, softer this time. "You left the closet open." Every muscle in my body tensed. I turned my head slowly, painfully, toward the closet. The door was wide open. I couldn't breathe. I hadn't opened it. I hadn't even gotten out of bed. And yet, there it was, gaping, waiting. The darkness inside felt deeper than before, as if it weren't just shadows, but something else, something watching. The knocking stopped. The silence that followed was worse. Then, I heard it. Not from the door. Not from outside. From inside the room. "You shouldn't have come here." A whisper. From the closet. The air turned ice cold. My vision swam with panic. I grabbed my keys and ran. I didn't look inside. I didn't stop to grab my bag. I yanked the door open and bolted into the snow, my breath coming in gasps. The motel was dead silent. The office was dark. The lot was empty. I didn't stop running. I jumped into my car, fumbling with the keys. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped them. Finally, the engine roared to life. I didn't check the rearview mirror. I didn't check the windows. I just hit the gas and tore out of the lot. I didn't stop driving until the sun rose. Only then did I finally pull over, my whole body trembling. I checked my phone. 1 bar of service. A single text notification. I hesitated before opening it. It was from an unknown number. "You forgot to close the door." I slammed my phone down, my pulse skyrocketing. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked pale, wide-eyed. And then, I saw it. Just for a second. The closet door. Slightly open. Behind me.